Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us to our monthly webinar. Thank you. My name is Sam Alamayo. I'm a 2004 Ron Brown Scholar. I'm here with my fellow Board of Trustee and co-host Meredith Eggers. Meredith?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today.
So for everybody that is new to the program and that is our regular, thank you for coming. This is our monthly program for the Ron Brown Scholars webinar. The Ron Brown Scholar is a program that is dedicated to nurturing the next generation of African-American leaders. It's a scholarship that honors the legacy of the late Secretary Ronald H. Brown. It's a selective program that advances higher education for community-minded and intellectually gifted African Americans. The program supports students before entering college through the Guided Pathway Supports Program, or GPS, and during the college years through the scholarship and mentoring, and after graduation through mentoring and networking program. Without further ado, we have a fantastic group of panelists today. 4 Ron Brown Scholar and alumni, and they are Brennan Gould, class of 2001. She's the president and CEO of Charlottesville Area Community Foundation. Eddie Martin Jr., Ron Brown Scholar, class of 2000, senior director of equity and engagement, healthcare for the homeless in Baltimore, Maryland. Ade Sawyer, Ron Brown Scholar, class of 2006, associate director in communication for the Hub Project. Lordserious Watson, Ron Brown Scholar, class of 2002, founder and CEO of Serious Tutoring Services. Awesome name, by the way, Lordserious, just matches perfectly. So I'm gonna start with you, Brennan. Tell us a little bit about where you are now in your career, in your life. Where do we find you now?
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's really great to be here. I currently live with my husband and 3, soon to be 4 daughters in Charlottesville, Virginia. Yeah, I know. Just as shocked as y'all. You know, and I find myself now, I've been in the philanthropy field, which I will say I didn't always ever know I was going to be in this sector. But I've been with the Community Foundation in philanthropy for about 11 years now, and about 3 years ago took over as CEO of the foundation where I work. And you know, we are a place-based funder that is focused on improving quality of life and very specifically creating a place where, in a region, where everyone can thrive. And part of the work that I've been leading has really been around equity, and specifically racial equity, around really creating opportunity and thinking carefully about how we shift, you know, harmful power dynamics, and specifically in community work, that we're creating more sustainable and just communities going forward. So that's where I'm at right now.
Wonderful, and congratulations, by the way. That's wonderful news. Eddie, please tell us where you are in your career and where do we find you today?
All right, yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, I think for me, so right now I serve, as you mentioned earlier, as the Senior Director of Equity and Engagement at Healthcare for the Homeless. A little bit about Healthcare for the Homeless. We work to prevent and end homelessness for vulnerable communities and populations within the Baltimore area by providing individuals access to affordable healthcare, sustainable incomes, and housing through 3 particular ways. That's through direct service, also through community engagement and advocacy work. And so I oversee equity, you know, racial equity and inclusion, the program and initiatives at our agency, something that I helped to found and create at the agency, and our community engagement as far as building strategic partnerships. I also wear a few different hats. I'm a PhD candidate in marriage and family therapy, and also I'm a U.S. Army chaplain in a major, working within the particular Northeast region. And so that's just a little bit about my work. I mean, I think at the end of the day, my passion and vocation is around service, you know, the opportunity to serve those who are most in need, and also to have what I would say is critical assistance to institutions, you know, so we can access capital to be able to help communities who are most in need. So I think that my work lies within the space of at the intersection of direct service and also within the policy-oriented space, and of course, I have a background in ministry. So definitely want to continue to build capacity to serve those who are most in need by getting more education and more experience within those particular spaces.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Eddie. Ade, where are you in your career and where do we find you today, brother?
That's probably the hardest question that you're gonna ask today. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm an associate director of communications at the Hub Project. We're a nonprofit based in DC, but of course working remote like many people, that works together to help to shape the policy environment and the political environment in a way that is advantageous to progressive ideals and goals. So we do a lot in my role. I do a lot of what we call earned media, working to generate media coverage for some of the campaigns that we run. I do a lot of that around some of the economic campaigns that we run, pushing for policies that will tax the rich, that will help pass progressive economic legislation, making sure that we're investing directly in working people, in communities of color, in people experiencing poverty, and then also do a lot of work with our polling project at the Hub, helping us to really understand what voters are thinking about some of these issues and help to shape the conversation around that as well. So in addition to that, I'm a board member of Higher Achievement. It's a group in DC that works with middle school students, 5th to 8th grade, to give them academic enrichment. So we're based in actually DC, Baltimore, and Richmond, giving academic enrichment to students and putting them on a path to college. So yeah, trying to be involved in service in as many ways as possible.
I love it. That's wonderful. Lordserious, same question to you. Where are you in your career? Where do we find you today?
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm still tutoring. I have a tutoring company and I'm also teaching. I have a full-time teacher position at the Galloway School, a private school out here in Atlanta, Georgia. And pretty much every day, I'm trying to discover and figure out innovative ways to bridge the gap between learning and understanding. The Galloway School is a pretty progressive school, and in light of the pandemic, everyone had to pivot and go online and come up with all these new ways to deliver an education, and just being mindful of the struggles that students may encounter in terms of just the emotional aspect of being on the computer all day, or just I would say, the actual physical draining kind of tiredness that comes along with being on a computer all day. I'm just trying to find innovative, progressive ways to deliver the content and kind of remove the boundaries of the classroom to be anywhere. You know what I mean? So just really discovering that, really enjoying it. I teach physics and advanced pre-cal, and then after that, I tutor pretty much and still run my classes. So a lot of hats, but very fulfilling, I would say.
That's awesome. Well, education is where everything is going to start. For us today, us a team, the one thing that we've been talking about is we're celebrating the 25th year of the Ron Brown Scholars Program, and what it means. Most importantly, 25 years of service and impact. And what we have always been told through the Ron Brown Scholars Program is don't forget the ladder. Make sure that you leave the ladder on and you support others to come behind you. And I want you guys to kind of reflect a little bit around the concept of giving back, the different forms that it takes, and how do you define it specifically for yourself, and how it has been a key part of your life, and all of you doing this phenomenal work. And can you speak a bit more about that concept of giving back? Brennan, please start us.
Yeah, I love this question. I think, on an individual level, we all have different both experiences and passions, right, around giving back. And I think for me personally, I have found that I've tried to engage in ways that can be can shape environments and kind of systems differently for people, who for younger folks, but also for adults, and I think one of the ways is through my professional work, as leading a foundation, and the ways that we can direct resources differently, and use our positions of power to actually make space and elevate voice that often is marginalized, as a way to reshape how our communities function and dismantle some of the hierarchy that we have lived with, unfortunately, for so long. I also serve as a board member on the Council of Foundations, which is a national philanthropy serving organization, and there as well, trying to sort of come to the board with a voice for how philanthropy can be reshaped and show up differently, and that's very specifically about how funding flows. But I will say personally, I've also try to think about how I, as an individual, am like engaging interpersonally with other people. Like, what are my personal relationships like? How am I? I try to, there's a circle of folks that I, kind of have a mentoring relationship with, or just, very specific opportunities to help shape their perspective and outlook, and really encourage them. And so really trying to engage in that deeply, so that, I know I have been heavily impacted, and some of my, like, I know I'm here today because people invested in me, not only through their own philanthropy, frankly, but also just in the time that they took to nurture me and to attend to me and to encourage me. And I definitely want to pay that forward.
No, absolutely. And that is the theme that has consistently been kind of passed on in every, RBS events. And it's never like, you're not supposed to give anything back per se, but just paid forward, the whole concept of paid forward, that generosity and gift you've been given. So Eddie, kind of from your perspective, and what you have done from, an Army chaplain, as well as a lot of the work that you're doing, be it professionally and personally, a lot of your work involves with the concept of giving back, and you are giving back professionally, personally, but it's also kind of a profession, especially when you're addressing homelessness. Can you speak a little bit more about this concept of, like, how does giving back defines for you and the different forms it takes?
Yeah, absolutely. And you said something very interesting in terms of the realities between the personal and the professional. It's oftentimes when we're in the professional that we always bring our personal with us. So that I almost want to even put like a semicolon in that, because there's something that's there with that. But I want to start off, I want to echo some of the things that, or the themes that Brennan was talking about, which is so great. It's always exciting to hear about and from other scholars in terms of what they've been doing. It's really motivating. But I want to start with this thing that I do or have been doing for the last probably a little bit over a decade. So on my walls, I have these two plaques that talk about that say who you represent, right? And so it's a list of individuals who've sewed into my life and being parts of organizations or institutions that I've been a part of. And it helps me to understand that, lest I feel the privilege or have the audacity or the arrogance to think that it was, me on my own that allowed me to be able to get to where I am. That's a false narrative if I were to ever think that, right? But I mean, there's a list of no less than, I would say, 50 to 60 individuals, and probably even more, that I can pinpoint and that I read every day before I walk out the door, or now I'm not walking out the door, before I jump on Zoom in the morning, right? And organizations to say that because you've had the privilege of individual to sow into you, because you've had all these opportunities, you now have a responsibility, baseline, to give back to those who are most in need, but just in general, right? And how can I, putting on my ministerial hat, discharge the duties of my ministry to be able to serve those who are in need. And that doesn't mean whether you're rich, whether you're poor, because we're all rich with something and we're all poor with something. There are areas in which we can grow and we can learn every day, right? And so I really have tried to make it my life's call to be able to be someone who serves, to exhaust myself in a life of service, lest I feel that, I am, at the end of the day, that I'm incomplete and not mindful of the ways that I've been giving back, right? And so that's kind of my motivation. And so thinking about practically what that looks like, over time, as I've been able to grow, I've loved to have the opportunity to work with and serve youth in various capacities, whether it's working in after-school programs, whether it's being a youth and young adult minister. That's something that I've had the opportunity to do, except, once I started working on my dissertation, time is a scarcity. We can't be everywhere, all the time. But it's been great to now be in professions where what I do is serve. So, for example, we're working with soldiers and their families who are dealing from a range of issues, from depression to the loss, of family members, who COVID-19, right? Or individuals who are dealing with difficult relationships, right? Or are dealing with financial issues, and just being able to be there. Sometimes it's just the ministry of presence without saying anything that's important, but also being able to help people along the way and being appreciative that they allow you to enter into that vulnerable, intimate space with them as they are able to walk through situations. That is a blessing, and a grace offered, as we're there to not tell people what to do, but help to guide them through a process so they're able to work through their situations. So I love to have the opportunity to do that as a chaplain, right? And then also working with individuals experiencing homelessness. Oftentimes we don't think about the reality of whether it has to do with youth or whether it has to do with other individuals, that PTSD and complex PTSD is a norm for a number of individuals who have dealt with distress situations. There are even 5 to 7 instances for a number of youth by the age of 12 or 13 who have dealt with, various forms of trauma. And so working with individuals experiencing homelessness, I have the opportunity directly to be able to mentor people, to be able to help and connect them with services, at our agency, but also to create opportunities as far as engagement, as far as policy. Even as we're looking at racial equity and inclusion work at our agency, it's not only for our staff, but it's also for our clients. Like, how are we thinking about our client level measures that are helpful in terms of looking at and applying those realities to the social determinants of health? How do we even think about the realities of certain things as simple as like GPS mapping to be able to connect the realities of homelessness with with other social determinants of health, as far as even like food, food deserts, right? As we're thinking about our food apartheid, right? And those realities, and we're thinking about the history of housing segregation, all those things. How can I contribute my knowledge and create programs and opportunities that brings a sense of awareness to the public so they can then engage? So there's the direct opportunity as far as service is concerned. There's the opportunity to create different programs and speak to certain agency policies and try to affect policy at the local and state level, that can help individuals out in need. So I think there's a number of different ways and dynamics that we can help individuals, and at least for me, they can contribute indirectly to individuals from a systemic perspective, but also directly from a service perspective related to individuals.
No, that's wonderful, and I want to piggyback on that, because you have to really relate to what somebody is going through in order to be able to provide that support. Ade, can you please talk about kind of the role of empathy in leadership, and everybody within the panel and within our community? You're all giving back so much through your work. Can you explain how, or comment some of the unexpected ways that being able to really understand the experience of others make this possible?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll say, I think a lot of the way that, particularly in the West, in countries that have either colonized or been settler colonized, the tendency to think about leadership is from a standpoint of authority, right? That like a leader holds the power to punish or reward, and that's sort of the core like function of a leader, right? To like to motivate or coerce people through either or some combination of those means. I think what I found in my own experience is though, both in being led by others and in being the leader of others, is that the real function and the way that it's often worked best has been starting with a position of or coming from a place of empathy, right? One thing that that I always think about when I was working at Weber Shandwick, I would do these story mining calls with different folks that we wanted to work with, who like we might want to put in front of media, and so you need to spend some time just like talking to that person for an hour, interviewing them, understanding where they come from, and so on. And so I had one where I was talking to a guy who was a retired Marine. He talked about the experience of being in boot camp. And Eddie, you might relate to this. So he talked about being in boot camp, and he said, you know, when I was a drill sergeant and I identified someone to be the leader of that group in boot camp, the main function of that leader, or like one of the main functions of that leader, was that they had to be the first to wake up and the last to go to bed, because they had to set the table for everyone else to be able to do their job. And I think about that a lot in the roles that I play now and in other roles, that so much of what a leader has to do is be aware of what the folks looking to them are going through, the things that they're seeing, the things that they're experiencing, whether that's directly related to the work you're doing or not, right? That's something I've been experiencing over these past couple of weeks as well, right? With so many shootings happening and the verdict in the Chauvin trial and so on. You know, I have people on my team who, well outside of anything that we're doing from a work standpoint, are just feeling it and going through it, and myself going through it, right? And being able to just talk openly about that and accommodate that. Brennan kind of talked about that in terms of like the interpersonal relationships, right? That's such an important part of leadership, to be able to understand what people are bringing to you every day, and be able to give them the thing that they need at an individual level, and then create a community by doing that, you know, across the group. I think it's incredibly important, and requires so much empathy.
You just defined a good leader. There are all sorts of leadership styles out there, some of which we've seen and hopefully are gone forever from this country. But I think that what you're talking about is really good leadership, and it is important. And if we don't start with empathy, we don't get anywhere. And, you know, I'd love, Lordserious, talk about how you deal with your students who are asking all of these questions and dealing with their own crises. How do you show them empathy, but still show them leadership and where they need to go and what they need to do?
Well, first, in terms of leading the students along, you want to kind of like be an example, you know what I mean? And also be vulnerable. So like a vulnerable example, like make sure that you are not the one, you know, kind of coming from that authoritarian position, kind of like Ade was saying. It's more like building that relationship and building that trust. And once you have that trust, then you could start focusing on helping them mitigate any kind of fears or any kind of struggles. And you can empathize with them, and you can you know, relate to them if you pay attention and you listen. You know what I mean? Like, as long as you're listening and you have your ears open, then you have the opportunity to make these connections. You have the opportunities to have these aha moments for them whenever they're even struggling or not struggling. You know, throughout the entire day, I mean, I'm like high-fiving kids all day and pounding them and giving them elbows. And it's not for me to be cool or be their friend. It's to let them know that, you know, that I'm here for them, you know, even outside of the classroom, you know. So if you really put that effort and you put yourself out there, and you can build that trust. I mean, after you build that trust, I would say, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Like, lean into your strengths. You know what I mean? If you lean into your strengths, you know, it's going to be an honest experience, and they'll recognize that for that. And participate in an honest manner. So those are the kinds of things that I would say a leader would need to bring to the table in terms of empathizing with like students and such, just being available and making an active effort to listen, I would say. And yeah.
I wanted to jump in. I love this conversation. I think, empathy and vulnerability, especially, and really, frankly, authenticity, is so critical in leadership. And unfortunately, I feel like so many like structures around leadership are not designed to really reward and encourage and frankly make it safe to show up that way. I say that as a Black woman, as both Black and woman, who encounters sort of structures that say, one, if you're not laboring hard for us, and like demonstrating your worth, that we can question that. And there's sort of this unspoken sometimes, or oftentimes kind of like pressure around, showing up competent, which can like cut out the opportunity to really slow down and attend to and really focus on culture and reshaping how we treat each other as people within an organization. And it's all about kind of getting results. And I just think so many kind of organizational structures are built, particularly if you are, sort of in the leadership levels, to actually force you into that box, and efforts to be vulnerable can be misinterpreted, right, as weakness, or as maybe she just doesn't know what she's doing, and it's hard to really resist that, and also to shape a different kind of culture, like really dismantle the structures that hold that in place. And it's hard to do it from within, and it's also hard to help other folks see that, especially if it's a white dominated, kind of, leadership structure, to just sort of see the ways in which, the patterns, the ways that we are treating each other are actually not human-centered, and they're reinforcing some ways of being together that is harmful, and specifically harmful for people of color. And it's not always safe to kind of name those things and say them. I know that both kind of personally from my own experience, but also, the ways in which, I've been trying to lead some work to really change our internal culture, to shine a light on some of those kind of cultural norms that hold in place this frankly, a way of being that is not human-centered, and it's not compassionate nor empathetic.
Yeah, in a way to follow up after onto that point, actually, we're having an ongoing conversation at the school. We each have groups, like small groups as teachers, and we have mentees. We're mentors for the group. They call us just advisors, and we're having a conversation how like cultural identities impact relationships, and how can we like be more mindful and be more aware of like the cultural identities, and just kind of being more respectful. And we have this theme of no place for hate, you know what I mean, kind of thing, as like a broader theme that we've been discussing. And a lot of the things that have been brought up in terms of just how do I want to describe it? Not necessarily being vulnerable, but at the same time, just being yourself and being authentic, right? How it's difficult to be authentic, and then what is authenticity, and how is that even, being formed, you know what I mean? Because we could take a wheel of all these things that can influence who you are, and what part of that would you call your like cultural identity? Is it, the basketball team? Could that be a part of your cultural identity, or is it your family and your friends? So all these interpersonal relationships affect the culture, and they play a role into the culture, and the culture plays a role into that. And really the conclusions of all of these conversations that we've been having, we've come to like this conclusion is just like, hey, just be respectful, and on top of being respectful and being mindful, don't be too afraid to be inquisitive. It's such a taboo kind of culture where if you ask a question, you're offending someone. And really just get back into understanding that when you ask a question, it's not necessarily to judge or offend. It's really because you might be curious, you know what I mean? And as a person receiving a question, try to lean into that as a teaching moment. And as a person giving the question, just try to be mindful with how you deliver it or when you deliver that question, you know? So I feel like if people just take on those kinds of personal responsibilities when interacting with each other, then we would just have a better kind of experience altogether.
I think that's so true. And I think we all have to be in the position to not be afraid to talk about things that make us uncomfortable, and then have the opportunity to learn and be open-minded. And Eddie, I think I cut you off. You were about to say something. What were you going to say?
I know you're good, because I'm just listening and like tracking what everyone else is saying, and so it's all really good. And so there were a few things that, well, I want to say Ade, Brennan, and Lordserious were saying, and it kind of reminded me, we were talking a bit about culture, right? And it's very difficult to change culture, right? We can talk about policies, practices, and procedures, but culture in itself is what really drives the realities, the atmosphere of something, you know, and how certain reality, I can say, in large context play out, right? There is a saying that culture eats strategy and culture eats policy for breakfast every day, right? You know, and that's a reality, right? So we can do all kinds of changing and say we're going to move something forward, but if you don't have the right kind of culture, right? And if you can't create that right kind of culture, you're going to always continuously have problems, right? And so another quote that I really appreciate is from Martin King. I tend to quote a lot from King. And he says, you know, anybody can be great because everybody can serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love, right? And, you know, and oftentimes when we dare, you know, have the audacity to talk about like love, right? You know, it's a conversation stopper, and it's not anything emotional. It's not anything like, you know, romantic, but this idea of having a deep care for individuals. I imagine just hearing what you're saying, Lordserious, about working with like youth and anybody, you know, especially youth. I would say that kids can spot a hoe from a mile away, right? You know, being honest, like they know at 5 years old whether you care about them, right? At 12 years old. And they may try you, if you care, they may try you a bit, but I think in the depths of most human beings, they want individuals who believe in them and who understand and who are willing to engage with them and be vulnerable. You know, there is strength in love. You know, Martin King, one of my favorite books from Martin King is The Strength to Love, right? You know, and it takes a lot to be able to be vulnerable in that place and open oneself up to that. But I think within any space, I know we want to be, as you were saying, Brennan, we want to be very mindful of how we're showing up. There are, you know, rules and regulations and strategies, you know, and I want to be mindful of being, you know, of how we are showing up, but I also want to be mindful about toxic culture, where it's toxic like white supremacy and white dominant culture, or toxic masculinity, right? And how we see that, or even as you're talking about intersectionality, how those things, you know, interplay. But I think it's important for us to think about how we are showing up, what is our place and space in these dynamics, and how we're able to engage in a manner that exudes a deep sense of care or love, you know, such that we are modeling that, and that individuals can, you know, really feel that, you know, and experience that. And I think, as you were saying, Lordserious, once we're able to do that and show that, you know, and I always talk about love or care becomes a precursor towards empathy, right? If we can show that, then that helps to foster that trust. And then that continued authenticity allows us to build relationships and to move forward, and helps to even change culture. So I think I'm just, in a lot of fancy words, repeating what everyone else has said, but it's important for us to engage in a way that shows that deep sense of care, and dare, if we even say it, you know, that type of love.
Yeah, and I would also say that type of love is contagious. You know, if you have a classroom of students going from one period to the next period, we've seen this in the school. Like, you'd be surprised the dynamics between, like, say if we had two teachers, and say like you have like a summer program, and one group, you know, you split them into two, they work with one teacher first, and then the other group, you know, second. Depending upon the personality of the teacher, depending upon the energy of the teacher, they may experience the groups in totally different ways. You know what I mean? For example, if one teacher's energetic and playing games and like making jokes and kind of engaging them from the beginning, you know, it's not anything to ask them to do a problem. It's like, hey, you know, what's 5 times 5? 25. You know what I mean? They're jumping out of the gym for it. You know, you're saying formula, sine A, cosine A, they're like B minus, you know what I mean? They're ready to participate versus like putting it on the board and giving them some worksheets and coming from a different like standpoint and saying, hey, we have this nice structure. The rigidity of this structure is what we're really going to emphasize and not necessarily the learning. And the kids, you know, they'll go along with it, you know, because that's what they do. They'll just go along with it. And we have the opportunity to affect their behavior just by our behavior. You know, it doesn't have to be that complicated. You know, it doesn't have to be that complicated.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also think that we're all talking about the fact that the more cultural intersections there are, the more opportunities people have to learn about each other and experience each other and understand that we're all, it is humanity, and we all have a lot more in common than we have differences, and we could all just be nice to each other. So I think that's sort of what we're all talking about. With that in mind, and with the verdict coming in this week, I want to change our direction just a little bit and get everybody's read on how that verdict in the Chauvin trial has impacted your conversations in your work and in your mentoring or in your ministry or in your teaching, and whether you feel like it's a big step, a small step, and sort of, and I know that's a lot of stuff packed into one question, but let's just talk a little bit about that. Who wants to start? That very hard question.
I guess I can start. I think in terms of how much of a step it is, I'll just be honest. Like I find the whole situation incredibly like frustrating and often infuriating. And so, you know, in terms of thinking of it as a step, I see it as pretty small, especially given that, you know, the very same afternoon, you know, we had a shooting of a young girl in Columbus, right? Like, I think it goes to show that while, you know, there was a conviction in this one case, after like the entire world blew up about it, that the structures that made that murder possible and likely, you know, haven't changed a whole lot. I think for myself, you know, doing the type of work that I do, I'm really lucky, you know, to be working with a group of people who all are who are all deeply affected by it, and so, you know, able to have really honest conversations about it in a way that is not always possible, and that's, you know, something I've experienced myself. You know, I was in corporate America when Michael Brown was killed, you know, when Ferguson blew up, and so, you know, I can feel the difference there. But I think it also is a little bit of a moment to really re-examine ourselves and what we're doing day to day, and ask ourselves, you know, what we're doing to shape and reshape some of these systems, as Brennan talked about a little bit earlier. But I mean, I actually had a conversation with someone today, one of my team members, where she just kind of talked about like how frustrating it is, right? Particularly as someone in her case and mine as well, who's very interested in the idea of defunding and abolishing police, right? But looking down the line at like, what does one do with, you know, these however many thousands of people who are used to running around with guns and being able to kill whoever, or do whatever to whomever. And, you know, like, how do you reshape the world, right? Like, how do you even start to develop that level of creativity. And I think it's one of the ways that it shows like just how important it is to be leaning on each other, right? Because I don't have an answer to that question. I was very honest with her that I don't. But that, you know, each of us are in this thing day to day, and we can see the thing that's in front of us. And that we can lean on each other, you know, to be vulnerable and to be honest and to put our collective power together to look for a solution that may not be clear right now. You know, that does not, I feel like I said this to her too, that like, I feel like that's a bit of an unsatisfying answer, but it's the best that I have at the moment.
Yeah, and so just to thanks so much, Ade. I really appreciate your comment and perspectives. I just so if I can repeat the question is, how are we feeling in response to the verdict from Tuesday? So yeah, so there are a lot of things on my mind regarding the verdict in itself. But one of the things that I think gets me the most is the false narrative that's created, the idea that I should even be excited about the fact that justice could supposedly have been done in this one instance, when there's so much injustice that exists, that people should be excited, right? You know, or that people should feel affirmed. Yet when we see how low has the bar of injustice, right, sunk to the point that we, number one, are fearful that even after not 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but over 9 minutes, when we saw, you know, in clear daylight, America, millions of people saw, and the fact that even in the midst of this, we have our doubts because it's become such a norm in society to see Black men and women. I mean, let me even talk about the audacity that there are a lot of Black women whose names even go unsaid or people, they don't even go noticed when we're thinking about the realities of deaths by the hands of law enforcement and so many other individuals. So the fact that you don't even have the courtesy of your name being mentioned when you are actually murdered, right? And so there are all kinds of problems that happen when we think about, you know, our systems of so-called justice, right? I actually just in our agency at Healthcare for the Homeless, we have what we call a community of practice. And we really focus on racial equities and other health inequities and really talk about the realities that exacerbate homelessness, some of the root causes, and especially looking at these realities through the COVID-19 pandemic, or two pandemics, the COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of racism, right? And so in this last conversation, we talked about this idea of reimagining restorative justice through the lens of eliminating structural racism, right? And one of the things that we talked about were the problems with retributive justice, as we think about how that really focuses on our criminal justice system and the ideas of punishment, you know, and recompense for, you know, crimes against the state. But what does restoration look like in these realities? But then we started talking about this concept of restorative justice, where we focus on, you know, the harm that's done and the idea of the victim and the offender being brought together and the community to really address these wrongs. But what do we think about the realities of structural racism, when in many ways there are policies and practices and procedures that are not a part of a broken system, but an intentional system? This is created intentionally to make sure that other individuals suffer and that other individuals are privileged, right? So what if we were to reimagine this idea of restoration or restorative justice through the lens of eliminating structural racism, that the crime in itself is structural racism, that we have systems that are built upon the white supremacist practices themselves, such that if we start dismantling, you know, not reforming systems, what does it mean for us to even reform a system that's built upon white supremacy? So within that system, all the reform is really redefined through the lens of white supremacy. We have to reconstruct and reimagine, right? But then we have to think about those people who are in positions of power, who hold these positions, and how do we even hold them accountable? What does it mean for individuals to even cede power in this space and redistribute power equitably? So it has to do with this idea of really renewing minds and addressing racism at the individual, interpersonal, institutional, structural, and systemic level, and understanding that these things don't happen in a vacuum, they're dynamically happening every day. And so I think for us to even get a modicum of justice, we have to really pinpoint those problems. Right? We have to think, as you were talking about introspectively all day, but then also think about the various systems, that are at play, and think about this idea that the ways in which we can redistribute, right, or power, and opportunities for others, so that way we can even start to think about what it means to mitigate inequities and really start to establish these modicums of justice.
I appreciate both of the comments so far, and I think I share similar kinds of reactions and feelings around, on the one hand, I will admit, like, I felt relief in the very moment that the verdict was read, because I think, which really was more of a signal of like how much I wasn't sure, after everything, how, what really the outcome would be. And I think holding my breath that I was going to be deeply, deeply disappointed. And I think I similarly, I think there was a kind of, just a celebration, right, that we witnessed. And yet, I think I think if anything, I worry that we skip over really acknowledging our collective grief when these kinds of things happen. And it's not just Black people grief, like, like this is our like our whole, like all of us together, like everybody in this nation, like this is our grief. We experience it differently for sure. We carry it differently for sure. But like what I do worry about is the ways in which we can segment once again that, like, oh, okay, good for those Black people, that they got justice, or as opposed to like, this is tragic for all of us. And we should feel that deeply, frankly. And I also do think about, like, how personally we like respond to this moment does mean, like, that is going to shape the kind of future that that our kids have. Like, there are kids now who are anticipating that those events will be their reality as they're adults too. You know what I mean? Like they're already anticipating the pain and hurt and disappointment that comes with living in this nation. And that's deeply, deeply tragic. And I think how we as adults in this moment are really thinking about our own kind of personal change, and whether or not we're willing to kind of shift our own attitudes and beliefs and perspectives and worldviews to show up differently, to speak out differently, to change things in our own spheres of influence. Like I like, our society doesn't change unless people do. And I just I feel like I watch these moments where there's kind of this there's a limit to how deep people are really willing to go personally to evaluate themselves and how they're really showing up and what beliefs they actually hold, and how much so many of us, because we've been all drinking the same Kool-Aid of white supremacy for so long, we actually do carry so much of that in as normal. And so I just I think, if anything, I'm hopeful for a real kind of deep challenge to what we think is acceptable, and as just sort of, and how low the bar really has gotten, and what we've been willing to tolerate for so long. And I'm hopeful, and I'm also just I think a bit sober minded in the moment, just about let's not skip over the kind of true reality in which we are living, and that it doesn't take much actually to get real comfortable again with all the kind of tragedy and heartache we continue to live with.
Not to overextend the conversation, because I totally agree with everything that has been said so far, and it's really hard for me to just have like, it's like when the verdict came out, like I didn't have any expectations, and I was kind of like Brennan, like holding my breath, expecting disappointment. But even the justice that was served, it really didn't have an effect on me. I mean, I feel like throughout the last, I would say, 4 years, I have been desensitized. You know, my experiences growing up in Atlanta and just with the police and knowing how I need to behave, and growing up with my cousins and them giving me advice, you know what I mean, how to interact with the cops and such. Like, there was one experience that I mean, one experience I could talk about, but I mean, there's tons of experiences that like, you know, I've had with cops, but one just stands out where this cop takes he pulls me over. I'm in a Lexus, and there's no reason, just kind of like, he's like, it's a check, you know what I mean? I just need to see your IDs and such. And I'm upset, like I'm vividly upset. I think I'm around like 23 years old. And I'm just like, you know, you can't just pull me over. Like, what's that about? And my cousin, who's like, you know, 5-6 years older than me, he's like cheesing, like he's just, you know, like smiling, you know what I mean, right? And I'm sitting there like with my face, I'm so mad. And then I give the cop my ID. He looks at it, he's like, Lordserious, that's not your real name. And then throws it back in the car, you know what I mean? Just throws it back. Like just inciting me. And then my cousin, he's there, and he's like, ha, 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 you know, that's his real name. That's my little cousin. We're just going around the corner, blah, 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 blah. And then the cop, it seems like, feels satisfied, like that was a good enough response to like, let us go, you know? And I'm infuriated at that moment. And it was a teaching moment for me. And my cousin was like, look, when you interact with the cops, you just have to behave this way. Keep it all smiles, you know? And I have done that since that moment, you know? It's just ingrained in me to do that. And it's not necessarily right, but it's just how we have to navigate. And when I wrote my Ron Brown Scholar essay, one of the essay, what's the biggest challenge that you see in the future? I quoted W.E. Du Bois and talked about gerrymandering and systematic racism being like the biggest problem facing the African-American community. And it just doesn't feel like it's changed, you know? So to have these conversations and to talk about, you know, and identify, you know, the various structures that need to change, I'm desensitized to it. I've had those conversations. I mean, not to like knock this conversation, but I've had those conversations, you know, and my mind goes to, well, what can I do to create a new institution? Like, why am I depending on changing this institution? Like, we've learned how to navigate. There are still ways to navigate where we can make a difference within one another and build our own sort of structure to not allow this to happen, not allow these cops in our areas like we have it, you know, in this area, you know, in Jamaica, I believe one of the biggest, I'm not gonna say drug lords, or he was just like a bad kind of individual. The name is like, the name is escaping me, but he had control of this area, you know what I mean? And where the cops wouldn't go, like the cops are not going there to address anything, you know what I mean? And I guess they did it in such a violent front, but the people supported them because it's like, hey, like at least this person is here with us every day and they care, you know, and it goes back to being there and showing up. So I know all these thoughts are really scattered, but the fact that they had a trial and they had arguments to even like, you know, describe like the thinking of like why he should be found innocent, that was enough for me to just be annoyed where I didn't even want to listen to anymore. Like, how could you watch the videos and come up with any kind of conclusion that it was okay or a mistake, you know? So it's just frustrating. Like, this topic like is really just hitting all kind of like personal like experiences, you know, where it's just like, it really doesn't, like, we have so far to go. I would really love to start fielding other innovative, totally, you know, outside of the box kind of solutions where we're not trying to change the perspective of the people in power, because I see the motivation that they want to retain power. And I don't necessarily think it's more of a race thing as much anymore, but it's easy to mask as a race thing because you can point out race and see the differences. And as long as, you know, we put a Band-Aid on it, you know, it's good until tomorrow, and we don't have to deal with it, and we can go back to business as usual. So I think it's very irresponsible to associate everything with race at this point, because the next generation under us, if you really talk to them, they're not racist. You know, they might be prejudiced because of what they were experiencing, but they're thinkers. They're a group of thinkers. So we could reach them in a different way, I think.
I think that's so true. And I guess, you know, it's always nice. We're sort of coming up on the end of our time here together. And it's always so helpful for people to be really candid and for us to all have the chance to talk honestly. And it is a really frustrating place to be right now. I think most people feel that way. But as we come to the end of our time together, Lordserious, I love your idea of thinking about, you're right, the Band-Aids don't fix it. You gotta think about big things. So maybe everybody, and I know this is putting you on the spot, but what's one big change? What's one big thing that maybe a scholar on the line today could hear? And God, I sound like an old woman by saying on the line. A scholar who's joined us today can hear that thinks about doing and changing that might really make that difference.
I guess I'll start because I think just investing in the community that you came from, could be a start, because that's where your cultural identity first came about. Those are the people that, influenced and made sure that you got to where you are. And to take that and to become successful and go into the systematic education where they allow you to get a job, be able to take care of yourself, and then not be able to pretty much go back and help anyone else. That's part of the problem. So once you make it, take it back. I think that would be like a good start. And it doesn't have to be big. I'm not saying go and buy everyone houses, but, buy your house back in that community. And, the skills that you have and the talents that you have, instead of trading those for dollars at times, help develop your own community. I think that would be a place that you could start as an individual, just wondering how you could help.
I think I might say, so personally, I think it's really important to sort out whether for you to survive in this world, you need to be in the fight or you need to like get up out of it so you can like keep your sanity. You know what I mean? And it's not wrong to be on one or the other kind of sides of that. We need folks in both places, and to care for yourself in the ways that you need to be able to like um be confident in sort of your personal dignity and value, particularly if, as we live in a society that doesn't affirm that. I so there's the personal care that I think is really important and really foundational to then I do think that ownership matters. And what I mean by that is, like so much of our aspirations can get shaped into, what you can do for somebody else, or that, your labor is what's most valuable about you as a person of color, and as a Black person. And I do think ownership is power at the end of the day. And so to the extent that you, it's a sort of this, own in the house, like own something, and thinking about how you're going to position yourself to really be able to control your destiny in that way. And I think on the added to that a little bit is, figuring out what you need to really unleash your imagination. Because I do think that part of what keeps us in this place of perpetuated white supremacy, but also kind of like living with what feels like intractable problems is just the stifling of our imagination, to really like think that there's something else possible, and or to believe that there are limits to it. And so, I do think that the situating oneself in a place where you can really unleash that imagination and to resist the kind of barriers that prevent that are just, some kind of takeaways I would leave folks with.
Eddie, I'm gonna let you go last because I feel like you're gonna you gonna close it out. I think the thing for me, which relates to what Brennan and Lordserious have said, is to really spend a lot of time wherever you are, spend a lot of time listening and making connections, both listening to other, people, but also listening to, I mean, just kind of the world around you. I don't want to get too existential about it, but like, so much of life is conducted by feel, more than, like an emotional feel, a spiritual feel, if you believe in it. Um, I, that like, there's a lot of listening that can be done, um, and things that we're, limited human minds and bodies. Um, just, there are many things that we can't explain, but no, you know what I mean? And so I think it's really important to be in the mode of like listening and taking in, and then looking for ways to connect oneself, with others in the world, and then connect others to each other, right? Right. I mean, communications does a lot of what I do, right? But the other way that you can think about that is, I mean, that's the essence of organizing, right? And so you find yourself in your college or in your workplace or in your home community or your family, and looking for those ways just to be able to listen, and find what draws people together, the things that people are commonly dealing with, and direct some of that energy. Brennan talked about the creativity, like that's such a big part of it. I think is combining the experiences of so many people, um, and starting to find what works, right? Because I don't have all the answers, and neither do you. But collectively, we're incredibly powerful. Collectively, I mean, what is climate change, right? Like that's our collective action that is like literally changing the chemistry of the earth, in a bad way, but it can be done in a good way as well. Um, and so I think that's the most important thing that a person can do. Or one of the most important things anyway, is to spend a lot of time listening and building community. Um,
And I don't think I have too much to add versus just kind of nuancing some of the things that everyone else was saying. Ade, I like to get existential, right? The ethicist and the minister in me, but to an extent, right? I would say that one of the things I would leave is this idea that anything can be accomplished through an unwavering faith. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like something that's theological or pie in the sky that people would say, but like whether it has to do with faith in oneself, right? Or belief in oneself and one's capability, one's belief in one's ability to do something passionate towards something, and even a belief in a higher power, whatever that may be, right? Whether it's someone's spiritual or not, right? And it's this idea that if we, as Brennan was saying, if we can just imagine it, see it, if we can conceive it in our minds and really truly believe it in our hearts, we can achieve it in our hands, right? And I feel like that is so true. And that doesn't mean that we won't engage certain maybe pitfalls along the way. I can tell you that most individuals, most of us who we would claim to be successful, have had situations where we have fallen, right? Where we have so-called failed, right? And I will use that word fail as like maybe a semicolon, not like a period or at the end of whatever kind of a paper, right? But it's the idea of continuously learning and being able to move forward despite the situations that we're dealing with. I can give you a perfect example of this if I can see if I can do this succinctly. I remember leaving Princeton Theological Seminary, and I applied for a few different PhD programs, right? And I remember not getting accepted in any of those programs. And for me, that was the first time that I felt like I had failed, but I failed big. I was like, I have a 3.7 GPA, I have all these different things, and why am I not being accepted to programs? But I remember when years before I had this epiphany of like doing work at the intersection of like faith and policy or whatever else. I mean, I could almost like see it, but I didn't even know how I was going to get there. And so, at this time, I had actually, it was, right after the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. And so I was looking for jobs, applied for like 200 jobs after having 2 master's degrees and 2 bachelor's degrees, and couldn't find anything, but had a conversation with Mike and Vanessa. They said, come down to the Ron Brown Scholar Program, right? had the opportunity to work for the program, ended up being ordained, worked in the education policy nonprofit, worked in the heart of the community as I was working with the scholar program, got to know scholars. And that experience helped me to take that next step where I ended up joining the University of Maryland School of Public Policy afterwards. Ended up having the opportunity to be a White House intern, and then ended up working for the Obama administration, where I later became a director of the Center for Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships, right? So within a matter of 3 to 4 years, I went from having issues before I didn't know what was next, right? To being able to work at the program and then becoming a director, in the federal government. And then I had that epiphanic moment where I remember when I was 22 years old, that was the epiphany of what I was going to be doing. I remember stepping into those spaces in those halls of the federal government and remembering that 22-year-old boy who had this vision. And the question that I ask is, if things had worked out in the way that I had wanted them to work out, that I thought that they were supposed to work out, would I even be in that space, right? But yet some doors had to be closed for me so others could be opened. In that context, as I continue to be discerning and also strategic and understand that it wasn't me on my own, but the opportunities being in a part of the program and other people who were helping me out along the way as I worked to get to that particular place, right? And so for me, this is how I pay it forward, understanding that if I didn't continue to believe, and there are times that I was struggling, right, in the midst of this, but to continue to move forward, even if it's a little bit of movement when we're struggling, right, and allowing ourselves to decompress, but also to continue to move forward, I think it's important for us to continuously conceive it in our minds, believe it in our hearts, so that we then can achieve it in our hands, and that anything is truly impossible. It is truly possible with that unwavering faith.
And there we have our mic drop. That was awesome.
We absolutely needed this week. So all of you guys, thank you so very much. Yeah, I'm mind blown. It was such a fantastic event. We could have gone for 5 hours. Really, thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a good afternoon.
Have a good one, y'all.
Have a good one.